I'm here with Susan Higginbotham. She's the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Susan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Liaga.
So first off, since the beginning of this coronavirus pandemic, what have you been seeing as far as instances of domestic violence in Pennsylvania?
Sure. Well, first, let me say thank you so much for raising awareness about what's going on with domestic violence in the context of this public health crisis that we're in. Because basically, intimate partner violence is a public health problem in and of itself. So then you add this complicating factor, and it makes things more difficult for survivors. So stay-at-home orders and social and physical distancing really create potential problems for survivors because the dynamic is that they may be at home all day with an abusive partner and they don't have those other outlets such as school and work to be able to get out of the home. And so reports right now are that some hotline calls are down, in other counties they're up. We won't know for sure until the 1st of May when the programs have submitted their statistics for this last period. But we suspect that if hotline calls are down in some cases, it's because survivors don't have the privacy to be able to make a phone call. You know, they're at home all day and they can't find the space, to be able to make those phone calls and to reach out. The other thing is that this public health crisis potentially gives abusive partners additional ways to abuse folks. And that's because, some survivors who are older or have underlying medical conditions, they might be at greater risk for seeking services because they don't want to put themselves at risk for COVID-19. Also, we know from prior research that violence in homes increases many times after natural disasters or when families are spending more time together, such as during holidays, for example. So some of the other tactics abusers may use is withholding information or access to information about the virus. They might prevent somebody from accessing hygiene products such as soap, hand sanitizer, masks, those kinds of things. They may prevent somebody from getting medical care. And they may even threaten a victim by saying that they have COVID-19 and that they're going to pass it on to them, whether it's true or not.
So along with some of those things that you just mentioned, what is defined as abuse? How do you classify that?
Well, it's a whole range. So a lot of people think that abuse is just physical violence, and that certainly is a part of the picture, but it's the psychological violence, the intimidation, the isolation. It's all a part of the continuum of intimate partner violence. So it's everything along those lines that is intended to control someone, to isolate them from others, and to make it possible to perpetrate psychological and physical abuse.
So for those who are perhaps in lockdown with someone who is abusive, what options do they have and resources can they access?
Well, sure. Thank you for raising that question because some people are wondering if services are available. And we want folks to know that services are available, that all 59 domestic violence programs are providing services, that advocates are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for confidential help and services. So while they have had to adjust how they're providing some services, such as telecounseling versus counseling in person, or doing remote advocacy for legal advocacy and medical advocacy, for example, programs are using technology in order to provide services to folks, and they are able to help people make safety plans. So in addition to that, courts are still processing protection from abuse orders, even though hours and procedures may have been modified in some counties. Survivors can contact the courthouse in their county to find out, what the modified hours are in the process. But the good news is that in many cases, temporary protection from abuse orders are being extended indefinitely. So that's very helpful. There are certainly options for emergency housing. Shelters are providing some social distancing and reducing the number of shelter guests who are in communal areas. They're also using other forms of emergency housing, like hotels, rapid rehousing funding, for example, to help people get into a new and safe home. So in order to locate services, survivors in Pennsylvania can go to our website at pcadv.org, and they can type in where they currently are so they can find out the program that's in their area. And I also want to elevate the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Online, that's thehotline.org. The phone number is 1-800-799-7233, or people can text "Love Is" to 22522 in order to find out where they can get safe housing or supportive services.
Who is it that your organization usually helps? Is there a particular demographic or profile of people who usually seek help?
No. Intimate partner violence is an equal opportunity public health problem. I mean, there are things that will exacerbate, the actions of abusers, such as in the case of people, losing their jobs. That's something that people are dealing with right now. We want to highlight the fact that April is Financial Literacy Month, because 99% of domestic violence situations involve some form of financial abuse. So that would be, controlling the resources, not letting someone work. In the case of what's happening currently with COVID-19, it could have to do with accessing government stimulus checks, for example. And that may be problematic. Survivors are encouraged to track their stimulus payments by using the IRS Get My Payment portal. That's another option for people. And so, we just want to raise awareness that these things are continuing, that with the public health crisis that we're in, it's made things a little more complicated, but help is available.
Was this increase, or rather the effects of the people being locked down in the virus, anticipated as the virus began to spread in intensity and people had to be locked down, or was this an unexpected consequence?
Well, as I said, we know from prior natural disasters and things of that nature that when families or couples are at home, 24/7, that there's potentially an increase in abuse that happens. And it certainly, as I said earlier, it doesn't provide a survivor with other outlets such as work, friends who are supportive, going to school and having some separation. So we were concerned about this from the beginning, and we're going to continue to monitor the situation and to just raise awareness that services are available. If somebody needs to leave their home because of abuse, there are options available.
What solutions have been implemented or proposed by the government to help those survivors of domestic violence?
Mm-hmm. Well, for one thing, the programs need additional funding to help pay for other forms of emergency housing. Because, for example, last year, our network of programs provided shelter for over 88,000 survivors and their children. Well, the way shelters are built, because of social distancing, they're not able to take as many people because they're working very hard to ensure the safety of their clients and the staff. So if shelters are not able to take as many people, it means that they're having to use other sources for housing, such as hotels, and that's more expensive. So at PCADV, we are working very hard to find funding for the programs to help support them with these unanticipated costs. And our development staff have rolled out a toolkit for the domestic violence programs to help them with fundraising. And we are working with state and federal sources around the stimulus money that can be put to use. The other thing that programs are in need of is personal protective equipment, because, you know, other than healthcare providers, first responders, and people cleaning hospitals, the folks working in programs are really on the front lines. And so we're working very hard to identify sources for supplies, for masks, for cleaning equipment, for gloves, and things of that nature.
For those who maybe aren't being abused themselves, but know someone who is, or maybe suspect maybe a neighbor or a friend, is there anything that these people can do to help?
Sure. I think that victims and survivors who are in that situation need unconditional support. So in other words, they are in a situation where they have an abuser controlling their activities or trying to control their activities. So supportive people need to help access information, be a sounding board, try to avoid telling a survivor what they should do, because what we want to do is empower people to make decisions on their own and to support them in those decisions. So the main thing would be to connect them with the resources that are available and to just support people, because survivors know when it's best for them to leave their homes. And so we have to trust that they are the experts on themselves.
And finally, as a final message, maybe to those who are possibly suffering at the moment of domestic violence, can you tell people what their options are at the moment?
Well, sure. First and foremost, we want people to know that no one deserves to be in a home where they are not safe or where they're experiencing any kind of abuse, be it verbal, psychological, or physical. Help is available. The 59 programs in Pennsylvania are open. They're providing services. And while they've had to adjust and rely on technology because of social distancing, help is available. So one thing that people can do is go to our website at pcadv.org, and they can find their closest local domestic violence program. They can also go to the hotline.org, which is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. That number is 1-800-799-7233. Or they can text Love Is to 22522. We also have a separate website called pasafelaw.org. And that is for non-crisis civil legal information and referrals. So that's another resource for folks who just want information. And the phone number for the chat line is 833-727-2335.
All right, Susan Higginbotham, CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Join our guests for insights on issues impacting local government and the citizens of Pennsylvania. Created by the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs, Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs connects you to legislation and policy that will affect you and your family. Your host, Chris Kapp, and his guests discuss current affairs that matter to you most. Connect with your state by tuning into Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs on Sundays here on PCN.
I'm here with David Mekeel from the Reading Eagle. David, thank you for being here today.
Sure, no problem.
So how has Reading and Berks County in general been impacted by coronavirus compared to other counties in the state?
We are right on the edge of kind of the hot spot for Pennsylvania. Kind of like the Montgomery County, Chester County, Philadelphia area was really, especially early on, the hot spot for it. And we're just kind of northwest of that. So it has hit us pretty hard. This week we hit milestones of 2,000 cases and 100 deaths. So it has impacted the county very seriously. Like everywhere in the state, all the schools are closed. Everybody's shelter in place. There's been businesses shut down. There's a lot of people who've been laid off from their jobs. A lot of unemployment claims. So yeah, it's been a very significant impact.
And what can this impact be attributed to? Just proximity to a large city, or are people not following guidelines?
No, I don't think it's anything like that. I mean, I think the state in general is having a similar impact. The shelter in place has been statewide. Shutting down schools has been statewide. Shutting down the businesses has been statewide. So I think in large part, I think the impact is pretty similar across Pennsylvania with this disease.
We've been using the term flattening the curve a lot. We need to flatten the curve. Looking at Pennsylvania as a whole, where do you think we are on the curve and our trajectory to the future?
Well, I'm not an expert on those kind of things, but from what I can tell, it seems the measures that have been put in place seem to be working, at least anecdotally. The cases don't seem to be increasing as quickly. And it does seem like a lot of people are following the instructions, at least here in Berks. There's not many people out. People are staying at home and trying to take care of themselves and trying to stop the spread. As far as we can tell, the hospitals have not been so taxed that they're not able to function. They seem to be doing okay with equipment and number of beds and all of those things. So it seems like, at least at the moment, we're doing what we're supposed to, and that's making things manageable.
Recent protests against quarantining have been popping up all over the country. Do you think that this will have an impact or an influence on plans for reopening?
I don't know. I imagine that the governor, that Tom Wolf, isn't really going to pay much mind to those. He's repeatedly said that he's following the science, he's following the experts, he's paying attention to that. And I understand that people are upset. People want to get back out and get back to their normal lives. But the governor has made clear that he is not going to reopen the economy and reopen businesses and loosen some of the restrictions until the science and the medical professionals are telling him that's appropriate. And I don't think the protests are going to necessarily change that for him.
Well, in March, Governor Wolf approved a program to provide emergency funding for small businesses. Where has this funding been going, and have you seen it affecting any businesses in Berks County?
I'm not sure. There was actually, yes, there was. I think there's only been one small business in. I think I just wrote a story about this earlier this week. Actually, there was one. It was a medical facility. I think a rehab facility in Berks received some of the small business funding. But other than that, I don't believe that we've had any others.
Well, earlier this week, state officials announced the creation of a business-to-business directory. What will this directory do?
From what I could tell, I actually wrote a story about that as well this week. That directory, if I recall correctly, that will connect businesses that are producing PPE, personal protective equipment, or other equipment related to coronavirus. It will connect the companies that are producing those or distributing those with companies that need them, particularly, medical or nursing homes, things like that. And it will help coordinate people who are seeking that kind of equipment and people who are able to provide it.
You mentioned that several businesses in Berks County have been forced to lay off employees or close. Do you think that this will be a permanent impact and those businesses won't be able to recover? Or do you think after this pandemic, they will be on the path to get to where they were before?
Again, I'm not an expert, I'm not an economist or anything, but my take on it is that it depends on the industry, it depends on the business. Some of these layoffs certainly will be permanent. Some of the downsizing will be permanent. Others will bounce back. I think it depends on the health of a company before all this happened, and also just on the nature of the company. There may be some companies that are able to pick up, when all of this, when everything opens up again, will be able to pick up right where they left off, rehire a bunch of people and move on. And then there's others. I mean, some small independent restaurants who, if you're a newer restaurant, you might not have the capital to survive something like this. You may close for good. You may never come back. So I think it just depends on kind of the dynamics of the company itself, and how prepared, or how solidly, prepared they are to weather something like this.
Well, during this pandemic, senior citizens have been cited as some of the most vulnerable to be impacted by it. For those who are living in nursing homes, are cases in those nursing homes being reported the same way that those in hospitals are, or is there a different protocol for that?
No, actually the state just recently has started reporting, providing more information on nursing homes, on deaths in nursing homes, and the federal government is actually going to be has actually mandated that there's even more detailed information about cases and deaths in nursing homes, in specific nursing homes. They're going to put out lists by name. That's not out yet, but the reporting, I believe, is the same as hospitals. They are reporting to the state, and the state is reporting those numbers.
And are you aware of if senior citizens or if other demographics have been most impacted by the coronavirus in your county?
That's kind of tough to tell. If you look at the information on the deaths, I think they do. They typically tend to be, older residents tend to be the ones who are passing away. But as far as cases, I don't have that information.
Well, looking towards the future, Governor Wolf released a plan for reopening, and we talked about how the protests have sort of incited a fire. Based on just the original plan, do you see Berks County being able to open sooner or later compared to other counties in Pennsylvania?
That's really going to depend on what the numbers show. Like the governor said, it's going to depend on a lot of things. And the governor did say that he's looking at the state opening, kind of how it's shut in pieces, kind of county by county, depending on what the situation is. And so only time's going to be able to tell that. We'll have to look at, day by day, look at the numbers to see, when a specific area like Berks County can open. I imagine, like I said, we are kind of close to the hotspot, to the epicenter of all this. So I would imagine we're probably not going to be one of the first to open. But again, only time and the numbers will tell.
And what accommodations have you had to make in your own work and reporting to make sure that people are getting the information that you would usually provide, but while still protecting yourself and like social distancing yourself?
Yeah, it's actually been interesting. There was a small group of us, I think maybe 4 reporters, who had still been going in and working out of the office in Reading up until Friday, I believe. We're now all working at home. So this is my home office behind me here. But it's been different. It's been a lot of work over the phone as opposed to in person. Trying to keep a distance, try to keep safe, both for myself and for the people we're covering. But we're still trying to get as much information out there as we can. We're trying to tell as many stories as we possibly can. Obviously, trying to stay safe at the same time.
All right, David Mekeel from the Reading Eagle. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
PCN is committed to providing the people of Pennsylvania with the most up-to-the-minute information about coronavirus. Daily special programming with civic, business, and government leaders and how COVID-19 is affecting the community. Airing weekdays at noon and 8 p.m. Live special coverage of the governor and the Secretary of Health, as well as programming designed to inform and assist everyone impacted. Go to pcntv.com for the latest information.
We're spending time talking with Major League Baseball veteran Neil Walker. He's about to begin his 11th season in the big leagues. And he came this season, starting out, he spent some time, of course, with his hometown team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, spent some time with the Mets, with the Marlins, the Yankees, and made the decision in the offseason to sign with the Philadelphia Phillies. So, Neil, tell us a little bit about the decision that the Phillies were going to be the right match in 2020.
Yeah, going into this past offseason, I obviously, like you said, I spent last season with the Miami Marlins, and personally, it was a good year. It was a tough year as a team down there, and we're kind of in a rebuilding mode. And I definitely wanted to hopefully be in a place that had a pretty good opportunity to win, but also had a good opportunity for me to contribute. And as the offseason rolled along, it looked like there were a couple teams that were interested, but also had a need for me to potentially play some infield, bounce around a little bit for second, third, and play a little outfield if need be. And the Phillies were one of them. So I'm going from the west side of the state to the east side of the state. And, it was I was really excited. Had a good spring training, and we were getting down to the very end, and the team was starting to get formed, and obviously things got shut down. So right now I'm back in Western Pennsylvania, my home, just outside of Pittsburgh, and hoping any day soon we'll get the work back up.
Yeah, it brings up so many things. Well, first of all, at least you don't have to change your license plate. You can keep the same license plate that you had all along. That's one good thing.
That's
but
true.
Obviously the call comes. You were literally, it was only a few days away from breaking camp and going for opening day when the decision was made by Major League Baseball to shut it all down. So give us a little bit more insight. You felt like the camp was going well for you, and you certainly had your opportunity to put your stamp on where you were going to be for the Phillies in 2020?
Yeah, I did. I obviously I came into camp as a non-roster invite guy, but felt like I kind of checked off all the boxes that they asked me to do in spring training, and obviously they asked me to play a lot of first base, some second base, and third base. Threw me in the outfield a little bit, and I think I handled that well on the defensive side, and started to swing the bat better in spring training later on, which is pretty normal for myself after 15 years of spring training. You kind of know when you're starting to hit that peak, but had a pretty good feeling that I had a good opportunity to make the team. And literally it was, I think, 5 days away from the day that things got shut down, where they had to make a decision on me whether to add me to the roster or not. We obviously got shut down. So, not obviously the health of the world is way more important than something from an individual standpoint, but a part of me is like, well, why couldn't this have happened? Maybe shut down maybe 5 days later.
So now this is a really when things get really bizarre for you from a personal standpoint. Obviously, you go through all your off-season workouts to get yourself ready for spring training. Now you start to get yourself into regular season mode, and now you get shut down again. So if baseball has to come back again, you got to kind of do a reboot of everything. So what are you doing right now to try to stay sharp for the regular season?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, you're living near the middle of the state, and you know what the weather is like here in late March and in early mid-April. So it's not exactly as cut and dry as go find a field and play catch with one other person, especially in these days. So I'm fortunate enough to have some equipment at the house, some weightlifting equipment to stay sharp, and have a couple local guys that play pro ball and in the major leagues that we're kind of able to sneak to places to make sure that we're somewhat staying sharp, getting our throws in, getting our swings in, and getting our workouts in, and trying to stay as close to that shape that we were in the last day of spring, the last week of spring training, I should say, which is not easy, but at the same time you kind of know what you have to do and where you need to be to be sharp. But that game shape is something that you go through in spring training that there's like a beginning, middle, and end. You start out real slow, and in the middle you kind of ramp it up. In the end, you're in a really good place from taking a lot of swings, and your core feels good, and your legs feel good, and then all of a sudden you kind of when that stops, you have to try to buffer that area where you don't want to get too far behind the 8 ball where things kick back up.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to simulate somebody to throw you a 98-mile-an-hour fastball with bite.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of days in terms of when baseball might come back, if baseball might come back, and if baseball might come back. The most latest thought process is to potential go to Arizona, maybe Arizona and Florida, and play out the Major League Baseball season, leaving everybody there, keeping everybody kind of locked down in those particular areas, and play out the season. You're now a family man in addition to everything else. So let me ask you really a twofold question. One, the validity of whether or not you think that is a very viable possibility, and two, what that's going to mean for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I did an interview last week and had kind of the same question asked. And I feel like if this was 6 years ago or 5 years ago when I didn't have a 3.5-year-old, I would have said, yeah, whatever. You want to go to Florida? You want to go to Arizona? Sure, let's do it. And now as a father of a 3.5-year-old and a 6-month-old, I'm going, oh man, to be stuck in a hotel and basically just go from the hotel to the field and not see anybody for 4+ months, that would be pretty challenging. And a lot of guys that I've talked to have had that same sentiment, and not just guys that are married or have girlfriends or have families or whatever. You just kind of think about the logistics of it. Arizona or Florida, for that matter, in the middle of June, July, and August. That would be challenging in itself. But at the same time, like I said, it's this whole pandemic is much bigger than the game of baseball, and every single baseball player that I've talked to wants nothing more than to get started, but to be able to hopefully have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, and make sure that we have a good idea of what could potentially happen if things went awry, if one of these situations occurred where we did go to Arizona or did go to Florida, because we want nothing more than to get back into playing baseball. So many people that I've seen around this area going, man, I would love to be watching baseball right now, or to have gone to the first series of the year in Pittsburgh or wherever. But that's the reality, is that's just not where we're at right now. So we all have our fingers crossed that things will kind of get going in the right direction here soon.
One of the things that kind of sticks in my mind is I'm curious of, and obviously, look, we talked about, you're a Pennsylvania kid. You went through the minor leagues. You played for the Altoona Curve, the Erie Seawolves, the Reading Phillies, the Harrisburg Senators, Scranton, Allentown, all great minor league towns in the state of Pennsylvania. But nobody's really talked about minor league baseball. And it's hard for me to believe, as much as player development is so big right now in baseball, if they don't get the minor league players back and going again, theoretically, you're looking at a year of no development for minor league baseball players.
Yeah, and when you hear about the possibility of the draft being 5 to 10 rounds this year, you're thinking to yourself, wow, it's typically 30, 35, 40 plus rounds. You start to kind of crop off that pretty much double A or below, or somewhere high A or below. You're missing out on some great baseball towns. And like you said, the Eastern League, and especially around this region around here, there's some great baseball towns. And you would hate to see, these wonderful facilities and beautiful ballparks and the support that they get in some of these great little small towns in Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, New York, kind of get shut down to a degree because, in this region, especially, at least in my opinion, people love to go to baseball games during the summertime. That's what you do. You go have a hot dog and a Coke or a beer or whatever it may be, and you go with your kids and you go enjoy a night at the ballpark. And you'd hate to see that leave the game. And you kind of cringe as a player that's gone through it when you hear some of the ideas of what could possibly happen with the minor league systems, especially at the kind of the lower levels, because it is integral to the process of guys' development. And, baseball is so different from other sports to where you really do need to start at those lower levels. And there's a natural progression that happens in those low A, high A, double A, triple A before you get to the big leagues. That's so much different from other sports that you wonder what baseball would really be like if you didn't have that.
So the thing that comes into my head, and we're talking about the way the baseball game is structured and development of minor leaguers, advancing minor leaguers to the majors has become so important. I would think that there's going to be some teams that are going to be facing an organizational decision if this would play out to the converted baseball season of Arizona and Florida. Let's say there's a Neil Walker trying to make the major league team somewhere. And if you're looking at a guy who would be in AAA and might lose that season, you might think as an organization, we'd be better served to put that guy who would be at AAA into major leagues, and all of a sudden a veteran guy's out of a job. Yeah,
and unfortunately that's kind of in the landscape of the last several years, I'll say, with guys that are over 30 and over that aren't considered somewhat elite. And it's kind of a situation where you almost understand it as a player and as a 30-plus-year-old, but you're going, I have so much to give. I have so much experience. But at the same time, exactly what you're saying, from an economical standpoint and from all sorts of different standpoints combined, there's organizations that aren't afraid to say, we're rebuilding. And there's organizations that are saying, we're going to push all the chips in and add as much as we can.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's not a lot of teams that are kind of in that middle road that value that type of player, like maybe similar to myself, that's 30 plus years old, that's had a pretty good career, that has a lot of experience, that could help out the younger players, but also contribute. And, that's just kind of the reality. So, I certainly, these last several years, just kind of seen the landscape of baseball change. I've really somewhat counted my blessings and really tried to enjoy every single day, because you never know if that's going to be the new norm. Is baseball be a whole bunch of 22 to 26-year-olds and sprinkled in a couple of 28-plus-year-olds. So, like I said, I'm very fortunate to even get to this point in my career in general, but in today's landscape, I'm really fortunate.
Going back to the days when you did crack into the major leagues, you grew up in Pittsburgh. You grew up a Pittsburgh Pirates fan. You were drafted in the first round by the Pittsburgh Pirates coming out of Pine Richland High School. And eventually, 2009, you make your major league debut. I can't imagine what it must have been like from an emotional standpoint to make your major league debut. We're at your hometown Pirates team.
Yeah, it was pretty bizarre. I mean, growing up, drafted in 2004, I basically went to my graduation and then got drafted. And then a couple days later, actually had my graduation party at the stadium and signed my contract the same day. And 2 days later, I'm on a plane to Florida going to the Gulf Coast League. And everything happened so fast. And I'm kind of, from a mentality standpoint, very much so like what's right in front of me right now. So I never really kind of basked in what was going on. And obviously my dream was to play in the major leagues. And I followed the Pirates from a very young age in the early 90s, when baseball was so influential in my life as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, watching the Barry Bonds and the Andy Van Slykes. Those are the guys that really motivated me to want to be a major league player. And it didn't even cross my mind when I got to my senior year that, you could potentially be drafted. I just thought, if I play well, maybe I'll go to college and maybe I'll get drafted somewhere. And I had a good year and was drafted high and obviously by the Pirates. And all of a sudden I get up to the big leagues, and that's really when it shook me. I got there and I was like, oh wow, this is this is pretty unbelievable. I got 3 siblings that are older than me, and my parents still live in the area, and now my wife, her family lives in the area. All these people are coming to games, and it's almost in my brain, I'm like, well, this is like playing in Altoona, But, the implications are much different at the major league level. And you go through a couple years, and I think it really soaked into me when we, after I guess it would be my 3rd or 4th year in the big leagues, when we played in the wild card game in 2013 against the Cincinnati Reds. And we obviously won that game, but it had been 20 years since we had a winning season. And, I remember in early September, we clinched just to at least go 500 or over. And I'm like, this is unbelievable. And my teammates are looking at me like, what the heck is wrong with you? And, we still got 20 games going. I'm like, you guys don't understand. Like, this is for the city of Pittsburgh. It's obviously different in Philly and New York and Boston, these places. City of Pittsburgh, the last 20 years have been really hard. And so I took a lot of pride in being a part of that, and didn't quite kind of bask in the glow of the individual part of it, but really took a lot of pride in what we kind of grew there from the time I got there. And then obviously we had a stretch of 3 years that we were really good. Now,
speaking of your days in the city of Pittsburgh, growing up in the WPIL, you went to Pine Richland High School. You were a multi-sport athlete at Pine Richland High School. At PCN, we have a show called PCN Sports Classics. And one of the games that is the most requested, has been the most requested, we aired it in December of 2019, was the Snow Bowl. 2003, Pine Richland plays Manheim Central in the snow. Neil Walker, a very big part of that Pine Richland football team. It's my understanding, I hear through the grapevine, you have never watched that football game. Is that true?
You know what, Bob? The game that you're talking about, when you guys showed it, was literally the first time I sat down and watched the entire game, and I'm not kidding you. And I knew when that game ended, when they blocked that field goal in double overtime, and the game ended, that I knew that was going to be the last time I stepped foot on a football field. And so it was really emotional for me. That was probably the most emotional I've ever gotten on in a sports forum. And so literally for the last, what would it be now?
17 years.
17 years. That was the first time that I had sat down and watched that game. And I tell you, I was just as emotional when that game ended as I was watching it in December. But, what was crazy to me was just how crisp that game actually was and how clean it was. And I remember us an hour before the bus was supposed to leave our high school, and we're watching the snow just drop. And we're talking to our parents on the phone, and people are going, we're getting word from the middle of the state that it's not getting any better over there. And Manheim Central is not exactly coming from too far away. We could easily push this game back like the two other games the next day were going to get pushed back. And at the same time, we had much more of a passing offense than Manheim Central did. And our coach is going, we're going. We're playing. We're prepared for this. We're going. And so we got on that bus and we came over, and we played an unbelievable game, and Manheim Central played an unbelievable game. And like I said, there wasn't many mistakes, which was so bizarre with the elements that were going, people sweeping the sidelines and nobody really knowing where everything was, and a lot of passing and a lot of good blocking. And, it was really bizarre that game was so clean as it was, and certainly something that I'll never forget the rest of my life.
That's what's so great about it. It was a memorable football game. Obviously, people still talk about it. And you're right. That's one of the things that people talk the most about that game. Not only the drama of it all, going into double overtime and a block extra point is the difference on the scoreboard, but how well the game was played under the conditions. That is what people talk about still to this day. And you had some really great offers to play football going into college. Penn State wanted you. Pitt wanted you. Obviously, you had the first-round draft pick of the Pittsburgh Pirates. That changes everything. But how hard was it for you to walk away from the game of football?
It was hard. And I think that if I didn't have a father that played and an uncle that played baseball, and my brother at the time was in the Tigers minor league system, and I had another brother that was playing at George Mason University, I think I might have considered possibly doing both in college. And I can remember being in my lunchroom, and Jay Paterno came into town, and he said, "What do we got to do to get you on campus to play baseball?" And I said, "Well, if Penn State University was in a climate like North Carolina or South Carolina or South, sign me up right now." But unfortunately, my dream since I was a kid was to not only play the major leagues, but I knew that I wanted to get out of this region from a baseball standpoint, because that November through April stretch where you're playing indoors and hitting inside cages, I was like, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. I want to go play in a warmer climate and be somewhere. And that's when I ended up signing with the Clemson University, which I obviously didn't go to, but that was my real dream. And football was something that I was so passionate about. But at the same time, I felt like from an individual performance standpoint, I was kind of a tweener. I was kind of one of these guys that was, if I played wide receiver and safety in high school, but I was a little slow to play wide receiver, and I was a little slow to play safety. And my biggest fear was that I'd get on campus at a place like Penn State, and they'd go, "Hey, you need to play outside linebacker. You need to go put on about 45 pounds," and that would completely ruin my baseball game. So at the end of the day, when I sat down and really thought about it, really talked to my parents and some friends, and I said, I love football, but I know deep in my heart that baseball is something that I want to give my all to. And obviously I haven't looked back from then, but like I said, that I'll never forget the last play that I ever played in football in the stadium at Hershey, and something that just has a fire in me. But maybe my son will play one day, and I'll kind of get to relive that for them.
There you go. That's what this is all about. Pass that on to the next generation. But speaking of which, you are at that stage in your life and in your baseball career that you have to think beyond that. You have the two kids at home. You got the wife. Everything that makes life a reality check if COVID-19 didn't make it a reality check for you. But what's your thoughts moving forward? And what kind of things are you thinking about what you want to do when Neil Walker's baseball career ultimately comes to an end?
Yeah, I haven't really dived into it too much, but I did 2 out of the last 4 years. I actually did one of the Whitfield championships. And both of those games were actually Pine Richland games. So it made a lot of sense for me to do it because I'm still pretty familiar with it. I still live in the Pine Richland school district with my wife, but so that was something that was enjoyable to me to do that, and obviously not play by play, but some color and just kind of get used to that. And football obviously is a little bit foreign to me now, the way the game is played now as opposed to when I played in the early 2000s. And baseball would be something that would make a lot more sense. But I still haven't really thought about if I would consider coaching or I would consider maybe doing something with the Pirates organization or with another major league organization on a coaching level or a front office level or whatever the case may be. So those are things, I really wanted to get through this year, and I felt like if I got through this year healthy and still playing the way that I felt like I was capable of playing, that I would try to continue to play next year and possibly one more year after that. But, I have started to kind of think about trying to do something, along those lines. Maybe I'll try to do something from a broadcasting standpoint. Maybe I'll try to do something with the Pirates organization. And maybe I'm fortunate enough to try a few different things when my baseball playing days are done and see what I might like. But, if you got any tips for me, please feel free to add on. But, I really did enjoy doing the football broadcasting, and I think that doing the baseball would be just as enjoyable, just kind of with my knowledge.
Well, let me just tell you this. I wish you the best of luck with the Philadelphia Phillies in 2020. I hope there is a 2020 baseball season. And let's make sure we stay connected with the Rolodex because we could always use some added knowledge when we get into PIAA championship seasons right here on PCN.
Got it. Well, I appreciate you having me on, Bob. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Best of luck to you. Neil Walker, the Philadelphia Phillies, looking forward to a new baseball season.